The Equal Freedom Institute is a grassroots think tank bringing together the next generation of liberal thought leaders, policymakers, and community organizers. This is the second installment in our series of interviews with contributors to the 2025 book, Liberal Emancipation: Explorations in Political and Social Economy. In this interview, EFI Vice President of Scholarly Research Bill Glod talks with philosopher and political economist Otto Lehto about his chapter, Power to the Powerless: Evolutionary Freedom as Emancipation and the Applications of Evolutionary and Complexity Theory for topics like guaranteed income and AI.
Today, I'm chatting with Dr. Otto Lehto, who recently authored a chapter on evolutionary liberalism in the collected volume Liberal Emancipation, edited by Michaela Novak and published by Palgrave Macmillan. Otto Lehto is a postdoctoral research fellow at the NYU Center for Bioethics and the Classical Liberal Institute at the NYU School of Law. A social and political philosopher, his work focuses on dynamic theories of justice, freedom, and well-being in complex, evolving societies. Methodologically, he integrates analytic philosophy with interdisciplinary PPE research, drawing on evolutionary and complex systems theory. His research areas include open society liberalism, AI governance, transhumanism, progress studies, and universal basic income. He received his PhD from King's College London in 2022. His work has appeared in the Journal of Moral Philosophy, Constellations, Economy and Society, European Economic Review, Public Choice, Basic Income Studies, among others. He is currently co-editing a book on the philosophical and political writings of Henry George. Welcome, Dr. Lehto.
Thanks so much for having me.
If there's one takeaway you hope a non-specialist can get from your chapter on evolutionary freedom as emancipation, what would it be?
I think there's two. First is that we are entitled to think big and hope big, because if we take evolutionary theory seriously, we can hope that our society can get much more interesting, at least, and definitely richer and better at solving problems than it is today. The second takeaway would be that I think both left and right can learn from each other, because in order to have a good theory of progress, I think we need to combine a commitment to kind of equality of people's dignity, which is what the left generally emphasizes, with an understanding of the importance of competition and of innovation and of some of the inequalities that are useful for society, that can play their part in making society better.
So why bring social justice back into Hayek, who famously expelled it from liberalism?
Yeah, indeed. Hayek is very harsh on social justice. At the same time, he actually kind of argues that there is a way in which we can think about society as having this kind of capacity to under some institutional rules to make society better for most people, and that is kind of a hidden implicit theory of justice, I think, there already. Indeed, as people like John Tomasi and Matt Zielinski and others have argued, there is a lot in the Hayekian picture that can be taken into thinking about what justice requires. I think social justice is important because most people care about it. People care whether the institutions and the culture and the society they live in is working for everybody, is working for them, not only, but also for their neighbors, for the people they live with, and also is fair to people who are kind of marginalized and oppressed. A good theory of justice tries to accommodate all of that. It is a theory of the set of rules under which we can all live, that are fair to everybody, and that is kind of the Rawlsian idea, but also kind of are worthwhile for us to have some stake in, because there is something in it for us as well. And I think that's what the Hayekian picture can provide us, with some modifications.
You frame emancipatory liberalism as a means of questioning the liberalism-conservatism alliance while avoiding the mistakes of the egalitarian left. Could you say a bit more about that?
Indeed. Emancipation is a term that is mostly used by people on the left. It's used by people like Eric Olin Wright, who's written about the real utopias. Um, um, the idea is that, as Rousseau puts it, we are all free, but nonetheless in chains in the society we live in. And I think that's a good insight to start from, that there's so much more we can do to make society better for everybody. That is to get rid of those chains under which we live. But why this kind of like goes against some of the conservative insights is that I think conservatives are too eager to lock in place things that they see have been handed down from the past, and some of those work well, some of those work less well. But if we take seriously the idea that the society and culture are evolving things, then we must also take into account the fact that they could be very different, and being very different could be much better. And in particular, getting rid of some of those kind of both mental and physical constraints under which we live. That is the sense that there's nothing more we can do. We have to adapt. We have to be kind of satisfied with what we have. We have to lock in place the existing hierarchies, inequalities. I think that's what conservatives are too eager to do. There's lots of good insights from conservatism that we need, which is kind of goes to the other part of that statement you read, namely that I think left can also learn a lot from the right. But I think what I think is the more important insight from the right is the importance of market competition and innovation, which I think has been criminally neglected by much of the left. I mean, certainly not all of it, but I think even people who think that they are kind of giving their due diligence to these things have not really grasped the vast emancipatory potential of these institutions, namely the capacity of what Popper called the open society, which is a society based on free exchange of ideas and goods and services, and capacity to innovate and to pursue your own good in your own way. The capacity of such a society to generate the conditions of emancipation, to generate the conditions of breaking those chains of traditional hierarchies, inequalities, and innovating ourselves out of constraints. I mean, the most obvious thing being getting rid of resource constraints, because the more we get richer, the more we don't have to fight over the scraps. And if we don't have to fight over the scraps, then we are in a better position to actually live in peace and harmony with each other, and the more we can also afford to solve problems that seem marginal, or that seem not to be urgent, because as we kind of satisfy in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs some of the more basic needs, then we can really climb up that hierarchy of needs and to address how do we create a flourishing art-filled, meaning-filled community for all of us. So that is all to say that I believe, taking the evolutionary viewpoint, challenges on the one hand the fixation of kind of a stable hierarchical society of conservatives, and also the idea of a kind of an egalitarian, also relatively fixed and stable view of some on the left, and that's why I think it's kind of challenge to both, but I think that both sides can benefit from.
Interesting. I think we might revisit that in a bit. But first, there's an observation that sometimes evolutionary change is sometimes understood as gradual, which sometimes gets evolutionary liberals mistaken for conservatives or incrementalists. But you argue that emancipatory evolutionary change can sometimes, and sometimes must be fast and revolutionary. So instead, you focus on this distinction between evolutionary and planned processes. Could you say a bit more about why we should tend to favor evolution over design and planning?
Good, and I think I should clarify that I'm not against planning or design. I think as we are rational creatures, at least in part, we have capacity to engaging in planning, and we all benefit from the fact that we all kind of plan our lives, we plan businesses, we plan our life projects, we may make joint plans, we come together to solve problems. All of this is planning. And sometimes we do that on the level of a nation state or some other collective political unit, and that's also fine. What I really object is the idea of thinking of the foundational kind of the impetus of society as being something subject to planning. That is, there is much more to be gained from pitting many people, many different experiments, many different kind of approaches together under a set of like common basic minimal rules, under which planning can find its proper role as something that guides the construction of those more local experiments. And but out of the confluence and competition and sort of flow in between these different experiments, that's where you get this more unplanned process. That is the more evolutionary process. Comes from the fact that, okay, I plan my life, you plan your life, and this company plans their products this way, this company plans their products that way, but we don't plan the whole society under any one of those plans, but it's a kind of the combination of all of those plans coexisting in a kind of ecology. It's a kind of a living ecology of plans colliding, combining, learning from each other, and hopefully building for something better. So that's the basic idea of how planning and evolution go together, and why I think it's again very important to understand that evolution is not a synonym for gradual change, because it is indeed used that way sometimes. People speak of the evolutionary kind of approach to politics, which is kind of a cautious and so on. And there's something to be said for that. But evolution, if you look at nature, often it goes through sudden transitions, leaps. Sometimes there's something completely unexpected that happens. This is the same in biology as it is in culture and economy. You have these leaps, these big transitions. How we got in society, for example, to having advanced AI from not even having electricity 150 years ago is quasi-miraculous. So there's this idea that we can get from a very different place to somewhere that's almost inconceivable and unimaginable by simply building up quite rapidly, in fact, these competencies and capacities of technology, business, cultural expectations, global infrastructure. All of this goes together, and so you see, we are in a society that's capable of these big transitions, and the only question is, can we handle it? Are we buckled in for that?
Okay, I want to turn a little bit to complexity with regard to the question about planning. So some emancipative views seem to treat complexity as inherently a problem to be solved. Whereas my sense from reading your chapter is that you and maybe many evolutionary liberals view complexity as often, if not always, a value to be welcomed. Is that correct? And why or why not?
I think that's essentially correct. I think the important thing is to say that complexity itself is neither good nor bad. It's neither always for our benefit or always against us. It really is a matter of what type of complexity and how the complexity is organized. So we're talking of organized complexity, that is complex arrangements of, let's take a look at the computer that all of us are using every day. It has lots of complex parts, but it's not the fact that it's complex. It's the fact that those things are organized in a particular way. They come together because there's processes in place that make them come together. There's market competition, there's design planning, there's basic scientific research. All of that is kind of directed and organized in a way that builds that complexity up and make sure that it is for our benefit. The social complexity, more generally, it includes everything from demographic complexity to different religions, ideologies, cultural practices. it's clear that not all of that is for the benefit of all of us. Not all of that is to the benefit of everybody. There's a lot of course, strife and polarization that come out of that as well. So that's the dark side of complexity. The issue is, how does that complexity get organized? And so I think that's again the reason to turn to liberalism, is to say that liberal institutions are designed, that is, they are organized to be such that they reshape the incentive structure of society so that complexity gets as much as possible organized in a way that produces benefits for everybody, not everybody equally and not all the time, but in a way that we can make the most out of it. So maybe some terms that are useful here is society can be robust if it can withstand kind of complex situations. A society can be anti-fragile if it thrives from this complexity, that it also wants more complexity. For example, if you go to a city, you want there to be more complexity of certain types. You want there to be more, better food culture, music culture. You want there to be, more creative people around you, because that just creates a better urban environment for you. But at the same time, if you want to build a nice household, if you have children, for example, you want some limit to the complexity that goes on in your house, I'm sure. So it's all a matter of perspective and trying to harness the complexity and build institutions to do that.
Greenwich Village could be kind of an interesting place to raise a family then. That could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you say that most solutions require discovery, that emancipation won't come from the reshuffling of old resources and solutions. But is there a risk that that's a straw man? Who defends reshuffling as emancipation?
Well, I wish that were a straw man. I think that a lot of people think that, for example, when they think of what the problems are in society, a lot of them think that what really needs to be done is that some people simply have too much of the stuff, and the solution is to take that stuff that's concentrated and spread it around. Now, I'm not against redistribution, but redistribution thought in this way cannot be the whole solution, because the only reason that there is a lot of concentration of things, and the reason that that concentration matters, that it translates into all kinds of good lifestyles or nice apartments or nice food or whatever, is because we have innovated, we have discovered those things. That is, we have discovered all the things that not just rich people, but middle class people and people who have some amount of income can enjoy. The issue is that discovery is fundamental. It's fundamental from the very early human experience, from the proverbial savannas to the Greenwich Village again, as you say, is how we tame the environment around us and how we turn that into processes of creation, innovation, discovery, and lest this be construed as too much of an economizing or economistic approach, let me also emphasize that discovery is also cultural discovery. As my colleague and former supervisor from King's, Mark Pennington, puts it, we need creative destruction, not just in economy, but also in culture. And that means that we need to experiment and discover lifestyles, attitudes, spiritual attitudes, sexual lifestyles, all of that, and that is where we know and we learn what can be better. We don't want to go back to a situation where we are fixed in our attitudes towards what is possible by a very limited set of options available to us.
Yeah, and on that note, I wonder how overlooked is the importance of something like multiple bottom-up experiments. So why are so many people, even like many smart and educated ones, prone to overlook the incredibly low odds that a given top-down plan just happens to be the best solution to a complex social problem? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I'm hesitant to psychologize too much about people I disagree with, but I think the important thing is that I think people people see some successes and they extrapolate from those successes. I mean, I think people, when they realize that they can sort of come together and create democratic societies that are responsive to people's needs, that they naturally assume that that translates to kind of transferring more and more of our projects into that collective space. But I think people have not been attuned to some of the insights of the social sciences that and economics in particular, but also the sciences of complexity that tell us that what the limits of this are. I think a lot of people don't of course read technical literature. A lot of people don't know about chaos theory too deeply, or they don't know about Hayekian economics. But I think that should change, obviously. But I think I think I think a lot of people have the opposite worry that, well, if we decentralize too much, what makes you think that if somebody comes up with a good idea, then that will not just be lost in the in the maze of the haze of people making thousands of experiments. Maybe one or two of those would be great if those could be scaled up, but like, what makes you think that those will be scaled up? So I mean, you could level the same criticism against that. But I think that's exactly where we need the evolutionary viewpoint, is we can understand under what conditions we can have this kind of a social mechanism that identifies and picks up. No, again, not unerringly, not always, all of these caveats are in place, but is capable of picking up those kind of weak signals, those kind of local sites of excellence or sites of innovation, and trying to scale them up. And I think that's underappreciated by many people, is how much open society, properly organized and properly institutionally governed, can do that. And so I think it's a matter of getting the incentives right. And also, I would also say that a lot of people rightfully point out many of the real problems of, we haven't managed to solve many ecological problems. We haven't managed to solve climate change. We still have a lot of oppression of minorities. We still have a lot of prejudice and discriminatory attitudes, and a lot of people just think that to solve all of those things we need to again centralize power. But I think we should and could employ the liberal institutional mechanisms to pursue those more effectively.
Great. So I want to try to think of how maybe a conservative viewpoint may push back at some of this, something along the lines of like a claim of Chesterton's fence. So let me sound this out and see what you think. Is there a risk in assuming too quickly that a given norm or institution is something from which we should be emancipated, if in fact that norm evolved for pro-social reasons that maybe are no longer obvious, given the competition of other innovations for our attention? So let me just raise this hypothetical example. It could be wrong. It's purely for the sake of argument. But let's say it's discovered that, and replicated. It's not just one study, but many studies show that the healthy development of young children requires much more time and attention from their biological mothers than is usually afforded by them, say, given liberal celebration of autonomous mothers in the workforce. Could this be a case where innovations such as greater female workforce participation clash with the needs of vulnerable populations, such as young children? So in other words, might, quote, traditional norms sometimes be harmfully neglected in evolutionary liberal views, or do these views leave ample room for refocusing on the value of certain traditions if the evidence plays out, if it indicates such?
Well, I think the Chesterton's fence type arguments are the best arguments in favor of conservatism, and some amount of conservatism, I think, is a necessary part of any good society. But I think what is plausible about the evolutionary liberal program, as I understand it, is that emancipation here should be understood in a time reversible way to some extent, namely that in a complex society, of course, we cannot de-invent electricity. We cannot, but if people want to live without electricity, I think we should make room for people who build their lives in a way that is not dependent on electricity. It might be hard, but I think, there's ways. I mean, coming from Finland, I know about people who live without electricity in the countryside or whatever, even during a dark and cold winter. It can still be done. I wouldn't recommend it. I think most people would not want that, but that's the sort of thing in which we can allow people to pursue a different lifestyle if they so choose, because overcoming resource scarcity should be combined with this vast space for individual choice and experimentation. And I think that's something that we can promise people much better than conservatives who want to lock people in, or those kind of progressives who equally want to lock people into what they consider to be the necessarily superior improvements. So rather than saying that all women should be in the workforce, the evolutionary liberal approach says, well, let's free people up to do that, and let's make sure that people can sort of like talk to each other about this. They can discuss, what is required. They can experiment with careerism. They can experiment with being a house mother, and they can combine those in different ways. And I think part of that experimentation is precisely seeing how those patterns play out, what we can learn from what works and what doesn't. And over time, society will come to appreciate, and it will develop narratives about those kind of lives that hopefully will guide the next generation to make better choices in the balance between those issues.
Right. Got to ask an AI question. How does the rise of advanced AI fit into this evolutionary framework, and does it spell trouble for liberalism?
I think AI is the key topic of today, obviously, and I'm not alone in this. Look, I think artificial intelligence is perfectly compatible with the whole evolutionary viewpoint. In fact, artificial intelligence, in my view, is simply one of the ways in which this evolution manifests itself. We've seen biological evolution, we've seen cultural evolution, we've seen economic evolution, and now we're seeing kind of machine evolution, if you will, or at least the rudiments of it. So I think we're going to, if we integrate this into our societies, they can be great boons for discovery. Like I've said, discovery is what matters most. We need better capacity to solve problems, and AI, if it already kind of like gives hints at its capacity to do so, and if it gets even better at that, then it'll be one of the best tools we have, maybe even the best tool to pursue scientific, technological, and other forms of innovation. Now, the trouble it might spell for liberalism is probably related to two things. First, it might be that if these things become too powerful, we kind of forget about the fact that they should be something like human well-being at the center of the social institutions, and that there is value in human autonomy. Now, I think what a lot of people are thinking about is AI will simply replace the need to have markets, need to have even democracy, because who cares about the human input anymore, because we'll just have AI do this. But I think the crucial insight of people like Mill and Hayek and Popper is that you need the people in the system, even if they're stupider than they are, even if they're not as good at solving the problems as AI is, because they are, first of all, they are the reason there is value in society, because at least so far AI is not capable of enjoying life. It's capable of maybe dissimulating enjoying life, but it's not capable of actually doing so. And so all of that power should be targeted to human consumption and human innovation. But moreover, humans play a part in articulating and making choices about their preferences in a way that is a valuable and indeed necessary input for the discovery process. So if you take the human choice out of the equation, I think you will have actually misaligned AI is a guarantee. But the other worry is about existential risk, and I think here we do need to think about political mechanisms to have some guardrails in place about some of the out of control scenarios. But these are just kind of like extensions of the core liberal institutional framework of having security and social insurance and these kind of institutions in place. And I think AI governance requires just sort of a new addendum to that core mix.
Maybe just dig a little more into that. What do you see as the biggest challenge that AI may pose for us right now?
Right now, I think it's a political destabilization, even though we don't fully understand it. But I think AI is driving a lot of the current polarization and destabilization. First of all, because it's accelerating the de-skilling crisis. It's increasing pressure on people in the labor market. It's taking away some of the hope of being authors of their lives that people feel. And it's kind of driving people to embrace very radical solutions. And it's also driving a lot of the geopolitical escalations that we see today between countries trying to vie for dominance. So I think it's causing a lot of destabilization that way. And I think it's also driving centralization of power, not just to governments, which are treating AI as a national security issue, but also to these few monopolistic kind of companies that are trying to kind of like hoard, and often in alliance with governments, to try and hoard the power of being the leaders of AI in a kind of very cronyistic way, and securing their market position through both regulation and intellectual property laws. And these are, I think, harmful developments that all liberals should oppose. We should think of ways of making AI more available for everybody, more decentralized, less tied to political and big business centralization.
Okay, great. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to highlight about the chapter, or is there anything that you wanted to comment on with regard to maybe your current research, the next questions that you're looking to tackle, anything like that?
Well, I think one issue that I've been talking about is universal basic income, and I think it's worth considering that we might have to think about something like UBI, not merely as a kind of last resort cash transfer payment to people who are in dire needs, but as a kind of way of having something like a collective stake in, for example, AI progress, so that as long as we live in a market society, we kind of like want people to feel that they're kind of stakeholders in social progress, and so we want people to have an incentive to support social progress. And of course, the basic way of doing this is to make sure that the innovations and discoveries that are made benefit everybody. But to the extent that people feel that their income is insecure, or they feel that they're being displaced by robots, then I think they need some kind of a concrete stake, and I think UBI could be one way to do that. It might not be enough, but I think it might be necessary. The second thing I will say, that I think we need to think past the traditional oppositions, and we need to think about ways of, say, combining Hayek and some of the insights of the egalitarian left. I think it's really sad how much people kind of fall into this tribal thinking about these issues. And I think we also need to go back and read some of the neglected classics like Herbert Spencer, who definitely made some mistakes, but I think has still some great insights and actually is much more of an emancipatory thinker than we realize. And going back to Henry George, I'm writing or editing a book on Henry George right now, and if you look at the rent crisis in societies today, I think the Georgist idea that there's something about the monopoly on land that still is a valuable thing, even in the digital economy. Like, we might be going to the cloud, but we still have to live on land. So there's still surprising relevance to some of these issues.
Okay, well, this has all been fascinating. Dr. Lehto, thank you for your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
If you want to see more programming like this, please make a donation at equalfreedom.org/donate. As a volunteer-led organization with no corporate or institutional backing, we urgently need your support. Liberals have a rare and real opportunity to roll back the spread of right-wing ideologies, but only if we act fast. As a 501c3 nonprofit, all donations to EFI are tax-deductible. Join us at equalfreedom.org. And you can follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. Follow us on Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn.